Oh, okay. Welcome, everybody. Uh, we've worked with Humira for quite a while with muscular dystrophy. She's a very talented lady who does, I think, everything. I haven't seen anything that she hasn't been able to do. She's agreed to donate some of her knowledge to us today. This is being recorded and it will be up on our YouTube channel after after uh, uh, we we got a echo after it's been edited. Um, if you guys didn't know, myasthenia is under the muscular dystrophy umbrella. So I always recommend if you have a diagnosis, it's always a good thing to become a member of muscular dystrophy. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Humera.
Thanks so much, Linda. I really appreciate this opportunity. I just prepared a couple of slides just to generate the discussion and conversation. Please feel free to stop me at any point. I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen. I'll wait a moment to see if that is showing up. Yep, I think it should be on. It is. Thank you. And I'm just going to put it in full screen mode. Oh, all right. Well, thank you again, Linda, and to MG Canada for this opportunity to share some information. I thought, as Linda and I were discussing this webinar, I would go ahead and call this webinar Approved Doesn't Mean Access. And that, I think, is the gist of the conversation today that we'll be having. Really, what we mean by this is we are in such an interesting time where there have been innovative treatments that have been studied for generalized myasthenia gravis that have now been Health Canada approved. But depending on where you're joining today's webinar, all of those Health Canada approved treatments are not available to your clinicians to consider for you if you are a candidate. And that's what I'd like to go ahead and chat about today. So really you'll be learning about some terminology, knowing what's approved, eligible, and available in plain language, recognizing the newer advanced MG treatment classes, understanding why access depends on the province, the payer, the clinical capacity, and importantly for MG Canada and Muscular Dystrophy Canada, where we can advocate. So often when I ask this question, it is not one that many people are really familiar with, which is once Health Canada approves a new treatment for generalized myasthenia gravis, provincial drug plans must pay for it. And so typically people really feel like once a drug receives Health Canada approval, then it is available. And that is false. And you all appreciate that, especially calling from different provinces and joining from different provinces. Now, provinces, following Health Canada approval, it goes to CDA, which are a drug regulatory body, which does a health technology assessment. Should it be a positive recommendation from there, then PCPA, a body that negotiates the price of the drug, works with the manufacturer to find the right price, and then the province decides, will we pay for it? For who? And for whom and under what conditions? And that is an important piece. So this right here just tells you the sort of relatively linear process that we have in place in Canada. Health Canada is our regulatory body. In the US, you hear of terms like FDA, and in Europe, you hear EMA. Health Canada is the one who looks at a drug and says, is it safe and effective? Then CDA, AMC, Canada's Drug Agency, does a health technology review. INES in Quebec performs that function. Should that stage be successful and positive, it then goes into PCPA, which negotiates a price. And then this is where it goes to provincial listing, which I just spoke about. And then from provincial listing, depending on how the province lists it, then it goes into authorization. Who is authorized? Who would be deemed eligible to receive that drug based on the drug plan's rules. And that's when it eventually reaches you, the patient. There are mechanisms currently in place in Canada or tactics where they're trying to do what's called stacking. So it doesn't fully feel linear, where the next step can start a little bit earlier. With that said, in our work at MDC at Muscular Dystrophy Canada, when we mapped out all of these steps, it takes about 900 days. 900 days from Health Canada submission to when, on average, it's available in a province. And so for individuals with myasthenia gravis, oftentimes we hear from government, like, do you need all these choices? Do you need the 5 treatments? Do you need the 6 treatments on a formulary? And I know you all appreciate this more than anyone, which is myasthenia gravis is known as a snowflake disease. We know that individuals with myasthenia gravis sometimes need to cycle through different treatments and therapies. We also know there's different types of myasthenia. And so having those choices is very important. We also know there can be different stages in disease severity. There is also always a risk of a myasthenic crisis. And this is why, having treatment choice is so important. So at MDC, we're huge advocates of, we're not proponents of any single treatment, whether it be efgartigimod, Vyvgart, or ravulizumab, Ultomiris, or Restigo. For us, it's about having treatment choice. These have been treatments that have been successfully studied in clinical trials, successfully evaluated by drug bodies and regulatory bodies. Now it's really about having them listed so they can be in the toolbox of a clinician to then engage in a shared decision making with you as a patient and family to know what's right. And that's what we're really advocating for, treatment choice. And so that's really, really thinking about that, having access for your physicians to that full MG treatment toolbox. And so oftentimes many of you probably have had access to the foundational treatment at the time you first got your diagnosis, a mestinon, a steroid, azathioprine, Cellcept. These are very familiar to many of you on today's webinar, IVIG. Really now with these advanced, highly specific therapies like FcRn inhibitors, really wanting to make sure this class, this level is also added to your physician's toolbox in managing myasthenia gravis. Because what we heard loud and clear when we did the myasthenia gravis Canadian journey mapping is that yes, these other treatments helped with my symptoms. They didn't fully resolve my symptoms, and it really helped keep things at bay, but it didn't allow me to return to the level of activity or work or health that I would have wanted. And so that's where really introducing targeted biologics is important. I know many of you know that there are different targets and different strategies. There's new targets and different strategies, and this just gives you a summary. At Muscular Dystrophy Canada, we are building a decision aid where you'll be able to see the different classes like complement inhibitors, FcRn antagonists, beta cell depleters, and really then what the treatments that fall under each class are and how they differ. And you can see that here as well, summarized. And so you'll also see in the decision aid that we're building, what is the administration, what is the target, how often you'll need to take it, whether you would need to have a vaccination, what are the typical side effects. That is information that we're including. And so then going back now to this conversation we're having today is at the federal level. Again, Health Canada is that gatekeeper in terms of knowing, is this drug legally and safely able to be sold in Canada? And so you can see with all of these treatments under those classes that I mentioned, they are Health Canada approved, including Janssen's nipocalimab. But then it's really at the provincial level that the HTA that they really ask, should public tax dollars pay for this new therapy? And so that's really where we're stuck. So right now, Manitoba and New Brunswick are 2 provinces that do not list any treatments for myasthenia gravis. 0 Health Canada approved treatments are on their formulary. And so that is very different than when you think of a province like Ontario or Alberta, Quebec, and BC. They also don't list the majority of treatments except for two. And so, really, that is important. I am really speaking today much about the publicly available mechanism for accessing treatments and therapies. There is, of course, a private insurance path as well. And I know some people with myasthenia gravis have been successful in accessing treatments and therapies for myasthenia gravis through their private insurance. Again, though, this does depend on the level of your drug plan and coverage as well. And so I think already you've sort of appreciated here the different questions that are asked at each gate or at each step of this process. Safety and efficacy. Is there value for the price? Can we negotiate a lower acceptable price? Should we add? When should we add? For who? And then your clinicians, your neuromuscular specialist, your MG specialist is asking, does this specific patient meet this strict criteria to qualify for funding, right? And access. And this is really where the patient voice enters. I think that, you know, you've all been very helpful in providing input when Muscular Dystrophy Canada has done our patient input submissions. So we do patient input submissions for the different drugs that are now Health Canada approved, and many of you have shared your story, your experiences. That is one way to contribute. So at this HTA submission process, I think that is exceptionally important. The other piece is I know many of you have also been in touch with your provincial MLAs, with your health ministers, in really talking about as a patient with MG how important it is to make sure that there are options. Um, Also, speaking to your clinicians about these new treatments and asking questions allows them to see where there is a patient need, and as they advocate, they'll be able to know as well. And then participating in registries. So, Muscular Dystrophy Canada in September will be launching on September 1st a registry where we are trying to track how many people in Canada have myasthenia gravis. Where do they live? And what type of MG do they have? And you might think, isn't that already captured? And unfortunately, it's not. And I think that that will be really important. We can go to a province like Manitoba and give them that provincial level data and say we have 60 people with MG in Manitoba and 60 people of they said 58 are interested in treatments. And that registry captures that. So all you would really be sharing is your name, last name, date of birth. You have MG, what type of MG, and have you participated in a trial before? Are you on a current treatment, or are you interested in the newer treatments? And so I think that level of data will be really helpful as well. I also want to take a moment to share that navigating public and private insurance. I talked about that, and I also wanted to mention that some provinces have exceptional pathways, and so these would be case by case hospital budgets or exceptional access programs. Many of you have also received the drug through the patient support program, where the industry partner has a bridging program. So before your province lists it, but sometimes those are not available in all provinces. For example, in BC, those bridging programs are not available because are you bridging to what? If BC has already indicated that they likely will not list, then the industry partner is not going to introduce a program to provide free drug if it won't be listed eventually. And so that is those exceptional access programs. I wanted to mention that this is just giving you a snapshot of the different advanced biologics like zilucoplan and rozanolixizumab, Rystiggo, and you can see across the different provinces, these are listed in different ways. I also wanted to mention that even when the same drug is listed in different provinces, like with Vyvgart or efgartigimod, it could be listed in different ways across different provinces. And that is also really, really challenging. This slide here just tells you that postal code changes the path. And so if you think of patient A in Ontario, their neurologist may submit to what's called the EAP, Exceptional Access Program. And depending on the senior plan deductible is capped at $100 annually. There can be different co-payments. It can also be looked at in different criteria, where patient B in Saskatchewan is listed publicly, but out-of-pocket senior deductibles are income tested and can reach up to 1,000. So there's also those elements that could impact access as well. There are also different criteria based on, again, the province, looking at disease severity, functional impairment, how frequently they'd like you to come back in for renewal, and what drugs to take ahead of time to demonstrate you need this drug as well. And MG-ADL tends to be used across the board for the majority of these treatments, if not all. And this is where I was getting at, that even if the same drug is listed in two provinces, they are accessible in different ways depending on where you live. So to say that again, if you would like to access Vyvgart in Ontario, your clinician would be looking at different criteria to know if you're a candidate versus if you're in Alberta, you would need to demonstrate failure on rituximab first. And the same applies to Newfoundland and Labrador. So same drug, same process of eventually having it listed, but two different criteria that your neurologist would need to be looking at. And also, again, the policy is not the same as clinical choice. Expert guidelines really don't recommend rituximab only for MuSK positive patients, yet you see a province like Alberta and Newfoundland recommending it as a criteria in order to access a new targeted biologic. So that can also be inconsistent as well. So really what this is really saying is that, access can fail after approval. While we celebrate when there are Health Canada approved treatments and therapies, there's a lot of work ahead for all of us in terms of really making sure that access is guaranteed. And there's also some real world barriers beyond whether a drug is listed or not. Access to a specialist who would be an MG treater, who's familiar with the drug and who can prescribe the drug. Really making sure that there is clinical capacity to provide that drug and who can do the MG-ADL. The travel and the distance and the coordination that you all undertake to access these new treatments. Sometimes if they're deductibles and cost sharing under provincial or private plans. Vaccinations, if that's required, then there could be potential delays there. Those are some barriers that are often not as talked about as well. I know I've worked with some of you on this call in terms of if coverage is denied, really requesting a written decision, appealing criteria, exploring alternative coverage, and that is something that we'd be happy to work on with MDC as well. Keeping track of your symptoms is really important. So when you are engaging in shared decision making, working with organizations like Muscular Dystrophy Canada and MG Canada to share where there are some challenges and barriers. Sharing your long-term outcomes if you have had access to these targeted biologics is important so that when we can share that back with our decision makers as well. Contributing to future drug submissions will be really important. And then of course, right now we have a What About Canada initiative, which is a petition to really call for a faster track in terms of access to these new treatments for myasthenia gravis. And so this is here just telling you how you can write a advocacy story. I worked with many of you on this and happy to work with you on how you can share your story with MDC and really thinking of it as like a 2-minute elevator speech. If you were in the elevator for 2 minutes, or less with a health minister, how would you share your story with myasthenia gravis? So I'll stop sharing there. I hope, Linda, that did cover what we wanted to really share here. I'll just take one moment to just flip on the screen before getting to questions. Muscular Dystrophy Canada is building, in addition to the decision aid, we are also building a tracker. And the tracker is to look at the different myasthenia gravis treatments in Canada and look at by province how they are listed, where they are listed, and under what criteria. And I'll just share that with you before getting into questions. Just pull that up. And
Okay.
again, this is in draft mode, but it is just a first insider look for all of you today on what that will be, and I'd be happy to share that once it is live with Linda, and she can share that with the group. So you can see here that this is looking at coverage across, and if we look at the disorders, such as, let's see if we can filter by myasthenia gravis. And looking at that, as I mentioned, a province like Manitoba and New Brunswick have zero drugs listed. You can see a lighter shade for BC, which aligns with what I shared earlier in today's webinar, in that BC doesn't list all, right? It lists only two drugs. Three are not listed. And so that will be really important. And for someone like Linda in BC, she would be able to access this tracker and know what is the reimbursement criteria, what is the renewal, when was it listed, how long after Health Canada submission, how long after CDA. If that's of interest, that's part of her conversation with her clinician and policymaker. She could also then look at something like this and see where drugs are not listed as well. Okay. And we're continuing to build that out. So it's just a quick preview of what's to come in this tracker, because many times that is not a lot. You'd have to really mine and fish for this information, sort of piece it together to bring it all in one place. And that's what the MG Access Tracker will be doing.
Great.
So I can go to the chat right now as there might be comments or questions, but maybe I'll read it out loud if that's okay, Linda. So
I'm going to turn off the recording before we get into this, if you don't mind.
appreciate it.